First of all, thank you for coming to this talk. It's an honor to have our guests that I'm going to quickly introduce. Today we have Laura, pronounced they, her, environmental psychologist moderating from Scientist Rebellion side. Then we are honored to have Zoe Claire Miller, a representative of the association of Crystal, this association of critical and solidarity scientists, academics in Germany that she will introduce later. We have Zephyr from the Netherlands, an artist, activist, astronomer in the Netherlands, pronounced they, and Rose Abramov, she, her, they, assistant professor in Maine, speaking or on her own behalf, and a member also of Scientist Rebellion since some time. I'm going to cut it very short to give the people the opportunity to start this call. When we started this series of talks, our question was what to do. It's a long series of talks. We have hosts and guests speaking more on the side of what to do in society or what to do on the workplace. And today we wanted to discuss what to do in the academia, in universities, in any institutions that are being attacked by governments and by different kinds of institutions representing us in a shameful way. We were discussing with other people in the last days. I'm based in Germany. and the last days, the last months have been terrible. I've seen a terrible escalation in the police violence on protesters and in the repression against people speaking up, and people will also talk about that. So I am deeply happy to have people here that want to discuss this. I'm going to admit the other people, and while I give the floor to Laura, I'm just asking the people to introduce themselves in the chat. I'm going to paste a link to a map with the names of native lands around the world. You are free to check it and introduce yourself, your name, your pronoun, and what is the name of the land you are originally from or writing from. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to do the back office now, and so leaving the floor to Laura.
Thank you. Yes, welcome everyone to this talk where we will talk about how academia is under attack with our great guests. So we'll start with a little round of introduction to go a bit deeper into where our guests are coming from or our speakers are coming from. So I want to ask all speakers where you're speaking from, which country, which position, and which organizations or mobilizations you're involved with. And I'll start with Zoe.
Yeah, thanks. Is my mic on? It is. So I'm speaking from Germany for CRISOL, the Alliance for Critical Scholarship and Solidarity, which is a quite new group. It was founded in September 2024. And it's basically a platform by and for people working in universities or also outside of universities in academia, in research, in cultural institutions. And what we aim to do is to provide collectively developed resources to defend fundamental rights, including networking among individuals and exchange with academic and civil society institutions and organizations. We do a lot of peer-to-peer counseling, compiling information and resources, and doing advocacy and public relations work for academic freedom. And unfortunately, we've been doing a lot of documentation of repression since we've been in existence in Germany.
Thank you. Then I would go next to Zephyr.
Hi everybody, lovely to see you all here. I'm Zephyr. I am an astronomer in the Netherlands, and I organize mostly with Scientist Rebellion here in the Netherlands, which is a very active and quite large Scientist Rebellion community. But I also do a lot of organizing work with the Dutch labor unions, mostly through FNV, which is the biggest kind of general labor union here. But one of my real goals is to link the Dutch climate movement and the Dutch labor movement, and that ends up working kind of across all of the labor unions, especially in universities and around education.
Thank you for your introduction. And then Rose.
Hi, my name is Rose. I am from the United States of America. I am from the northeasternmost state, which is called Maine. I'm an assistant professor in forest science at the university there, speaking on my own behalf. I'm also on the board of a nonprofit called the Climate Emergency Fund, which raises money and makes grants to climate activist groups. And I wanted to note first that we've prepared a new dedicated fund for groups working to stop authoritarianism. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm also a member of Scientist Rebellion Turtle Island, which encompasses the United States and Canada, and have been engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience campaigns with them for a few years, and working with other groups trying to connect, create as dense of a network as possible in the United States and Canada.
Nice. Thank you all for your introductions. And let's dive now a little bit deeper into the topic of today. Let's do now maybe a round of what's going on in the place where you're at in terms of attacks on academics, on academic freedom, and on scientific institutions in general. Yeah, to maybe switch up a little bit the order. Zephyr, go ahead.
Sure. So there's currently a fascist government in the Netherlands. I think that might be less known than some other places, but it's a proportional representative government, so it's a fascist prime minister and a coalition, a conservative coalition. And there are quite clear signs of what they are doing. They are investing a lot in militarization. There are big cuts to social services generally, and public services. There's a strong kind of campaign, as we're seeing in a lot of places, of defining and reinforcing an effect, and to justify their militarization. And there's a big step up in policing. It has been a difficult time, and as in many places, to be part of a community of resistance, but also as vital a time as there has ever been. The specific thing that is happening right now is that the government's cuts are, amongst trying to cut many social services, are attacking universities. So there are big cuts to higher education being debated. There's lots of resistance, and it is in the balance as to almost certainly some degree of them will happen, but how much they will happen, who they will happen to, and what they can get away with.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing with us this local context of the Netherlands. Maybe Rose, do you want to go ahead and share more about the situation in Turtle Island?
Sure. So the rise of fascism is a common theme here. The Trump administration are kind of the classic authoritarians using the typical playbook. Within the first weeks, they've been dismantling the separation of powers between the three branches of our government, the executive, legislative, and judicial, raising up the executive power as much as possible. They've been purging federal employees and installing loyalists, engaging in invasion of private government-held data, so increase in surveillance of citizens in a variety of ways. They have been threatening to and pulling support from universities that allow protest on their campus. And sweeping through social media data, like looking specifically for international students who have attended protests, particularly around Gaza, but basically any kind of campus protest, specifically to jail or deport them. We've heard reports that ICE is on Columbia's campus. So like this is all happening very quickly. Just at my university, a lot of our funding was frozen. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs have all been threatened. Attack on the rights of trans students to play sports or to be people. Two major sources of funding to the university that benefit like local industries like fishermen and farmers are being threatened, which I think is actually kind of interesting because it sort of shows that these threats are actually widespread, pretty much affecting every demographic in the US that isn't white male billionaires. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that too. And then maybe let's finish the round with Zoe.
Yeah, I have some specific examples, but then also like a description of the wider situation. So I guess I'll go with the wider situation first. So a brief overview of wider political developments related to and affecting academic freedom in Germany right now. Definitely in the past years, there's been an increase in demonization and delegitimization of academia. This increase was specifically visible during the corona pandemic. There was quite a large increase in the defamation of climate science, which really went hand in hand with the defamation and attacks on climate protesters. And with this, we also really saw the use of innovative, authoritarian, and undemocratic repressive measures, such as preventative imprisonment of activists. And since October 2023, there's really been an exponential shift and growth of attacks on fields of study such as post-colonial theory, but also the university and academia at large. So students protesting against crimes against humanity in Gaza, they faced massive calls for increased securitization, carceral measures. The IRA definition of anti-Semitism plays a big role here. There's been a big push to formally adopt it at many levels. And of course, the key to the IHRA working definition is that it's prone to be used to equate criticism of the Israeli government and their actions with anti-Semitism. So this is all happening now behind the backdrop of the increasing popularity of our fascist party, the AfD, and the reaction of all of the other political parties, liberal, centrist, conservative, has been to adopt far-right positions, which really results in the AfD setting the agenda without even having to be in governing power for it. And they've been calling for the defunding of social, artistic, educational projects that relate to queer, diversity, anti-racist, post or decolonial theory or practice themes. Woke is like in the U.S., it's being used as kind of a catch-all dog whistle of demonization. So there's really a lot of analogies to the attacks on DEI and Trump's regime happening in Germany now. And yes, so this is all coming from the fascists, but the Conservative Party has been widely adopting the stance, and they just won the federal elections last month. Within academia, we're seeing silencing and censorship happening via intimidation, a lot of pressure towards deplatforming and cancellation that are really using kind of para or pseudo legal methods. So one example would be secret dossiers being made about academics and artists who signed open letters or basically tracking their social media likes. And these dossiers are compiled alike by lobby groups like the German Israeli Society, the DIG, Deutsche Israelische Gesellschaft, but also state-funded anti-Semitism monitoring groups like, for instance, RIAS. And then these are kind of mobilized and supported by far-right tabloids that engage in campaigns against individuals and against groups. And unfortunately, almost all of the German mainstream media outlets kind of take over these talking points and positions without questioning them at all. And something that's maybe unique to what's happening in Germany is the concept of Staatsräson, so raison d'etat, the German term for it. And this is kind of, it's really formally no more than an opinion. Like it's not a law, it's not formalized anyway, but it's an opinion held by government officials that Germany's fate is tied to Israel. So Israel's safety is part of Germany's raison d'etat. And this then is mobilized as a justification for the critique and attacks on the critique of Germany's support for the plausible genocide in Palestine and massively silencing any critique thereof.
Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing also the German context. Yeah, I want to now dive a bit deeper because I guess now we have all talked a little bit more about the general, general dynamics that are going on in the different countries. And so, yeah, I'm wondering why is it a threat and how does it fit in the bigger picture of political dynamics where you are based? But I guess this is also something that you already talked a bit about, like right-wing government, silencing of protests. But so also feel free to maybe take more concrete examples and yeah, use them to even go more broad in the sense of how does it fit into generally, the systems that we're living in. Rose, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of parallels, but I'll speak about the American context. So, my analysis of what happened in the last few elections is essentially that we keep swinging back and forth between two parties that both represent the interests of the wealthy elite. Um, and the Trump administration in the last election did a better job of pretending to care about the needs of the working class, right? That they would improve their material conditions. And they also had a simpler story, which involved scapegoating immigrants and trans people, LGBTQ, like Black people. You know, they just picked some minorities and pointed the finger. And I think that that's probably something that we're seeing elsewhere. But I think one of the central issues of we're sort of why they're so successful at splitting all of the working class into these kind of demographic identity groups is because they haven't been able to improve our material conditions, right? Like income inequality has been rising at a massive rate. We've got like 700 super multi-billionaires who control a great proportion of our wealth. Our healthcare system is kind of a disaster. Our education system is becoming a disaster. So a lot of our social services are failing and people are really struggling. We think of the United States as a very rich country, but a lot of people live in poverty here. And so I think that that is sort of behind this expression of hatred that's building, but it also represents an interesting breaking point in the existing sort of colonial capitalist extractive system. So like while it's a very dark time, it's also a kind of an interesting potential opportunity to demonstrate to everyone that this system that we are currently working within does not work. And I think that over the next few years, Trump will demonstrate for himself that it does not work. I mean, he's dismantling services that everyone needs. And, you know, imposing tariffs, wasting, he, you know, wasted a bunch of water by opening up 2 dams as like a show of, you know, his idea of what like wildfire control, and it didn't make any sense. And so he's doing a lot of very silly things that remind me of my mother's early childhood in the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. Just like edicts come from above that are not well thought through and are going to cause food shortages, economic despair, production slowdowns. Not that we necessarily value those things, but things that currently are tied to human well-being and will affect human well-being. And so I think that, you know, over the coming years, we will have an interesting opportunity to tell a different story to Trump's former base, to say, hey, like Trump scapegoated the immigrants and kicked everyone out. Like, did that improve your lives? You know, what's happening now? We're also seeing an interesting rise in labor power in the US, despite incredibly like repressive policies against unions. Nevertheless, we're seeing a rise of union formation, unionization. And so I think a labor consciousness is growing in this country. And that's something that I think we need to connect to and cultivate, and is probably our best chance at breaking what in the US is a two-party system, which is both of which are captured in different ways by elites that don't represent the interests of most people here.
Yes, I see. Maybe Zephyr, you also want to say something about that, since you also mentioned your main goal is to unite this union, and go ahead.
Yeah, that was really well said. Thank you. You said lots of the things that I would like to say, but I think one thing that we're seeing now and that is really important to kind of acknowledge and own up to is that whilst there is no long-term solution to the climate crisis from capital, there is a medium-term solution, and as abhorrent as it may be, it is walls and guns and maintaining the status quo for as long as is possible. And I think that we're starting to see that, like all crises already and into the recent past, but into the future, all crises are at least part the climate crisis. Just like on a very hot day, every problem is a part the very hot day. Like you need to change your bike tire, and the fact that it's a very hot day is there making your life more difficult. The climate crisis, and especially the economic impacts that it will have, are already affecting the needs and wants of capital and the ways that it expresses that in the political power that it has. And it's an interesting state because often this isn't represented to us in any way. For example, no party, especially not a reactionary party, will say that they're doing the things that they're doing because of the climate crisis. But then few parties, especially not reactionary parties, need to say the reasons for the things that they are doing. And I'm really glad that you also mentioned the rise of the labor unions. I think this is happening everywhere. Like, I think this might be happening without a climate crisis. The level of inequity that we live under now is about as high as it's ever been, and is in part a consequence of the dismantling of labor unions over the second half of the 20th century. But the climate crisis is definitely one of the reasons it's causing them to reform. But it's also really important to be part of those unions to keep the climate crisis as a central goal. It is not the case inherently that a labor union necessarily represents the needs of climate. Labor unions can have the same kind of short-lived institutional motives as a government or as a corporation, but a union is its members. And if we are its members, and if its members are there saying that one of the most important things, the most important thing to them is to continue to have a planet to live on, that will be the will and the represented outcome of the union.
Yeah, unfortunately in Germany, I think that there is at this moment like also a lot of awareness kind of growing among activists that it makes sense to join labor unions or also join leftist political parties to be part of the basis that then can help try to form the policies that they decide to pursue. But there's like a really, really strong presence of the Palestine exception within labor unions here in Germany. There was just recently a really sad occurrence of a big labor union organized led protest against funding cuts where the labor union basically ended up permitting the police to separate the Palestine bloc, which was the anti-racist bloc, but it had some signs that drew connections between funds going towards militarization and war and funds being lowered for social services and for artistic academic needs, that drawing the connection between what's happening in Palestine and what's happening everywhere else. And there were a lot of people with keffiyehs, and basically they were really, spoken ill about from a mic from people who were responsible for the protest, treated badly, separated from the rest of the protest, and then attacked. And kind of this, it's a very German thing that's, I think it's tied in also to a very obscure ideology that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's called Anti-Deutsch, which was kind of an offshoot of the far leftist intellectual scene in Germany. And basically it was leftists who, when Germany reunified, became really afraid that this could be Germany becoming a fascist power again. And so they were always strongly aligned with Israel, also as a reaction against some collaboration between pro-Palestinian groups who used terrorist resistance tactics and German leftists from the 60s and 70s. But so they've taken this to quite the extreme that they show up at Antifa protests with an Antifa flag that also has the Israeli flag and the US flag. And they have quite a lot of cultural dominance right now. And this is really, really influenced also unions. It's quite unfortunate. What you were saying about the immigrant scapegoating, Rose, that also really ring a bell with me for what's happening in Germany right now. This whole election campaign that we just had was completely set against a backdrop of that was really characterized by racism, by basically it comes down to the root cause, white supremacy. But yeah, so it was all about scapegoating refugees and immigrants, especially Muslims and Arabs, and alleging that it's their fault that there's crime, and that it's imported anti-Semitism is the main anti-Semitism problem that Germany has, which of course is blatantly not true, because denazification never happened in Germany. And yeah, the first results that we're seeing now from this, from the coalition negotiation between the Social Democrats and the Conservative Party now, unfortunately, are also really the worst fears come true regarding all of these laws that have an aspect that can be racialized, or that can be expressed in a punitive way against people who don't have a German passport, or also those who do have a German passport. So they're looking towards reneging on dual citizenship now, so taking away German citizenship from those who have said something that's anti-Semitic, and then by German standards, saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is anti-Semitic to the degree of being criminalized and punishable. So like a very, very different perspective than most of the world, quite the bubble that's like lost track of what the rest of the world thinks. But yeah, so these horrible changes are being made, and also they're scapegoating poor people. They want to crack down on the aspects of welfare, which kind of respects people who are unable to work and make life much harder for welfare recipients. But most of all, the largest section of the agreement, the coalition negotiations that we've seen so far, is all really targeting foreigners. And it's also really notable when we think about the academic context for this, that all of the claims that are being made by the Fascist Party and the Conservative Party about the link between migration and crime, there's no research that backs it up. Research says the opposite. And it's also the same with the claims of universities being hotbeds of anti-Semitism. There's a lot of recent research that shows that actually the opposite is the case.
Yeah, thank you for bringing forth the situations in the different countries. And yeah, then the last question that I would ask before opening up the floor more to questions from the public is, how are you standing up against this? And what are some successes, maybe potentially, or some reflections on what would be necessary to move forward? And yeah, maybe to keep on switching up a bit the order, I will invite Zoe to go on. Yeah.
Okay, so what we are working on with Crizol, or some of the activities that we're pursuing and strategies that we're using, are we're collaborating with students a lot. I mean, they're kind of among the most precarious segments of society being attacked right now that we have to do with professionally. So we're trying to support their right to free speech and to protest, for instance, through helping them negotiate with university administration, supporting and consulting with them on their strategies, and doing professional press work, as well as supporting and participating in academic formats that they develop. We're also working on initiating research projects, as well as academic formats such as lecture series that are relevant to defending academic freedom and address specific aspects within the current rise of authoritarianism that we're facing as it pertains to different academic fields. We're trying to monitor specific instances of repression, so from specifically police violence to deplatforming, defunding, targeted defamation. With that, we're trying to help people by providing peer-to-peer support and solidarity, developing strategies to push back against these forms of repression. We're also collaborating and pooling information, so co-developing strategies together with NGOs, mostly ones that work on human rights. And we're working together with lawyers and legal associations, legal groups who are trying to identify targeted strategic lawsuits, so spaces where it really makes sense to push through all the way with a legal case to go all the way to the highest court. We're doing a lot of political advocacy work, and also trying to professionalize academic colleagues who don't have any experience in chatting up politicians. So trying to use this really privileged position that academics do have with science and academia and academic expertise still being respected to some degree, trying to use this in conversations with policymakers, and also compiling scientifically substantiated resources for political allies to use. So, for instance, like a classical kind of, I mean, it's really like lobby work. A classical lobby format is the white paper. I'm not sure if this is the same in English. In German, it's Weisspapier, which is basically like a list of topics with and arguments that aren't signed by anyone, but can be circulated and used by different people. And also, yeah, making policy recommendations. We're also using Freedom of Information Act requests to try to access information that the government is trying to withhold, and trying to facilitate whistleblowing and networking with media to try and get coverage for things that really need to have attention given to them. So yeah, key events around repression, again, around academic freedom being attacked, and also scientific perspectives on them.
Nice. Very nice to hear all of that. Yeah, Rose, what about in the context in the US?
Sure. Okay, so the Trump administration has many weaknesses. Like I think right now they seem like quite powerful, but I think it's important to recognize the weaknesses that they have. So like first of all, the alliance between Trump and Elon Musk and the other kind of billionaire oligarchs is quite weak. I mean, these are all people with very bad track records of cooperation among their peers. And so those types of alliances, and they already have some differences in like they have some different objectives, like Elon and the Trump administration have already, or like Elon and Steve Bannon have already disagreed on H-1B visas and things like that. So there are policy wedges that can potentially be used to break up those alliances and make them less effective. Second is that the pro-democracy groups here still have the broad ability to organize because we have, a relatively uncensored internet. Like I didn't need to use a VPN to get on the Zoom, and a variety of communication tools that are sort of like, and a kind of escalating sort of mutual aid education of how to avoid surveillance. So that is a strength that we have that not all places have. And then kind of third and most important, I think the administration is making two really classic mistakes right now. The first one is that they're attacking a lot of federal services that support poor and working class people, such as, like imposing tariffs, ignoring the climate crisis, just like hampering our ability to predict the weather and respond to emergencies. Our emergency management agency is also getting, so just a lot of, and, the attack on Medicare is imminent. So there are a lot of kind of services for people at the education department that just kind of affect everyone. And that should cause him eventually to lose support because the American public has again and again made their decisions, their voting and polling decisions based on whether their material needs are being met. It's typically in our media talked about as like, oh, is the economy healthy? Is the economy good? But it's really about human well-being, like whether or not we have access to healthcare, housing, food, education, etc. I already noted the growing labor movement here. And also wanted to point out that there is a broad organization for a general strike starting. It may take a few years to organize, but I do think it's going to happen for two reasons. The head of our largest group of unions in the US is the United Auto Workers, and he has asked, they've taken a progressive turn, like they've asked for transitions to electric vehicles to uphold labor rights and things like that. And they've set many of the dates of their individual union contracts to expire on May 1st, 2028. And then there's another kind of general strike movement that may be able to strike earlier than that. Because actually, I think it would be better to strike during our primaries than our elections, because primaries are actually more important for getting a progressive candidate to the top. So, stay tuned for that. That's like a kind of a long-term goal, I think. And the second mistake that the administration has made is they're currently firing many federal workers and researchers, academics, smart, organized people who understand how the government and how emergency and essential services work. I was recently listening to another talk from one of the leaders of the Otpor movement in Serbia, who noted that Milosevic did the same thing when he came to power, that he fired all of these smart people, and all of a sudden they were free to sort of like look at the cage of colonial inequality, extractivism around them, and like organize, like and analyze it and organize to break out of those patterns. So in Serbia, he noted, this is Ivan Marvic who's speaking. He noted that the fired workers academics, the students became the seeds of the pro-democracy movement that eventually overthrew Milosevic and also kicked off waves of successful nonviolent pro-democracy movements in the neighboring countries in Eastern Europe. So like, you know, we can do the same thing if we organize in our respective countries. So yeah, I mean, like in many ways, I feel like this time is very despairing and chaotic. But chaos does create opportunities for major change on both sides. And so what I'm focusing on now is kind of like opening up the lines of communication between groups that focus on different kinds of things, you know, climate and other movements, organizing at multiple levels, like university up to kind of international levels such as this, and just training people so that when an opportunity for change comes, we're ready to take it. And you know, by change, I don't mean like putting another neoliberal Democrat in power, but really like breaking the cycle of like fascism versus less evil neoliberalism. Yeah, as we all see, there's kind of an opportunity to create a new labor coalition. And I think that this will automatically lower emissions because the majority of Americans actually consume their fair share or lower of the remaining carbon budget. And it's really like the wealthiest people, as I'm sure is true in all of our nations, that are majority responsible for a disproportionate amount of our total emissions burden. And so kind of, you know, taking away their money will automatically lower emissions in a really significant way, will remove the ability for them to scapegoat immigrants and minorities, because that only typically occurs when income inequality, you know, forces the rich to point the finger away from themselves, as we've already discussed. And so in this way, I feel like, you know, the pro-democracy movement, the labor movement, the indigenous and civil rights movement, the climate movement are all kind of the same thing. And that is a strength of ours, right? Like we have this incredible solidarity power against like, you know, a very, very few number of billionaires who don't actually add that much value to our society. And I see some hopeful concrete signs of resistance in the US, like Elon Musk sent that stupid email to a lot of federal workers of like what list 5 things you did last week or whatever, and over 1 million people didn't answer it, and probably even more than that answered it in some kind of satirical way. So there was really, it was one of it was a great example of kind of like mass spontaneous disobedience or non-compliance. And so I think that, you know, if we organize, if we really manage to organize more, we can escalate that non-compliance in a serious way. That's my hope.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Zephyr, what can you add?
I mean, this is again echoing, but general strike is the goal. And I think we're at a state where any general strike is a general strike for climate. Like, in many ways, the climate crisis, particularly the CO2 crisis, is just the particular form in which the crisis of capitalism becomes the way in which the world ends. And any like refusal to take part in the institutions that have become very ingrained in a kind of day-to-day continuation of our lives, whether that's like the ways we do transport, the ways we get our food, almost every part of our life has a form that needs to change. And I think the only way that can change is by, for some period, stopping and falling back on the natural habit of people to try and make their communities work and to try and provide for each other. And so, like, a general strike is a path to that. And then I think we need to ask the question of like, how do we move towards general strike? When you first asked the question, Elle, I was sort of thought like, oh my God, what are we doing? Like, I know that we're doing this, we're pushing for this, but the hope is hard sometimes. But there is a path there. It is happening kind of everywhere, as I think we've seen. We've talked obviously from the 3 countries we're coming from, but it's almost the same, or lots of the same events and also emotions going on. And the real thing that has been very central to our organizing here is pulling all these communities into a stance of solidarity, getting them to think in terms of not just what they're doing as part of their movement, but as how what they're doing as part of their movement helps other movements, such that it becomes, as is so often the case at times of revolutionary social change, a single movement. And I think that's a really interesting one for us to consider as scientists. We're maybe some of the less prepared for some levels of solidarity. I hope that that's something that people like don't mind me saying, but I think it's like we come from quite a specific part of society, of social class, of kind of access to privilege. And there's a lot of learning in solidarity. We've had to do a lot of learning of like how to be there supporting the Palestine movement, supporting queer liberation movements, supporting anti-fascist and pro-democratic movements. And it's clear that also those movements are learning how to have us and have other groups supporting them. This is a change that is happening. It is coming, but it is work, and it's a new, or maybe a very old, but new to many of the people in the movements, lens in their organizing work of feeling like they can and they should be relying and be reliable for others.
Thank you so much for all of your words. Like really, really beautiful and somehow, yeah, describing lots of what's living right now. Yeah, I would like to open up the floor now for questions from anyone who has been listening. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat, and then you can write with that or you can raise your hand also, and we can unmute you. And if you want, you can also direct the question to a specific speaker or otherwise more generally. I see already one hand raised. Yeah.
Hey, yeah, thanks a lot everyone for the introduction to what's happening in the different countries. I have a question a little bit related to what Zoe was saying about the budget cuts demonstration in Berlin, where the anti-Palestine, where the Palestine solidarity part was kind of like kept away from the rest of the demonstration. Like I was discussing these attacks in academia in the US and in the Netherlands with some friends, and we're wondering how to say, like in some way with these budget cuts that are happening, like in different countries, it's kind of this very clear direct attack on like, your funding or your salary or things like that. And how can we make sure when we fight against these, that we're also fighting against the bigger picture? And I know that like this kind of like, there was also some discussions about this in the Netherlands, for instance, where there were also some maybe difficulties with how to integrate the Palestine solidarity in these budget cuts demonstrations. And yeah, I'm wondering also how this is happening in the US, because there was, for instance, this March for Science. Like, how do you make sure that when you're standing up, against something that's like basically your money, you're also taking bigger picture into account? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I guess it's really a question to all three speakers, so maybe we can do a round. Yeah, Zoe.
I mean, in this specific case, I think that what's been happening over the past year is that so many activist groups who come from many different areas, but definitely see their battle as connected to the battle for a free Palestine, is that there's been this realization that the media is not covering what's happening to us and to our allies at all. So we kind of have to do the job. So there's been a lot of self-professionalization over making documentation, creating coverage, and then putting it out there, even if it's only always on like terrible corporate-owned social media. At least these things are visible now for those who seek them out. So I mean, this also happened after the incident that I was describing, that there were multiple declarations of solidarity coming from different groups with different backgrounds who were present and witnessed it, and accountability is being demanded. So we know that there are conversations going on where but the people who are responsible for what happened are being confronted with the reality of what happened. Because I mean, it wasn't just people getting pro-Palestine bloc being cut off. It was also racialized people facing police violence and having really, really horrible things happen to them after they were cut off of the protection of the large group. So I think that there's painful conversations going on with the responsible parties from the unions who were responsible for this. And but also, yeah, in parallel, the strategy of joining unions, of joining groups that we want to change en masse, and then trying to change them from within.
Yeah, thank you, Zephyr.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That like unions in general are a tool I deeply believe in, but the unions as they are right now, my belief in them is pretty patchy. Like it's kind of improving, they're kind of improving, but they're improving because their members or even new members are coming in and changing them. We've had to have big conversations about like getting people to say like we need you to getting people to say to their unions like we need you to be in solidarity and protect these people. Otherwise, we will not take part. Otherwise, we do not believe that you reflect us. And like that can be in the form of this like kind of threat of like we will leave the union, but also just being there and being like, we are the union and we believe this, and you need to represent that. I'll also just say really briefly, like that organizing against cuts is quite a difficult one, or a potentially difficult one because often cuts, if they don't come from somewhere, they may come from somewhere else. And so when we're organizing against cuts, we've got to be organizing against them across the board, saying that there is not a need to dismantle social structures. There is not a need to expand the things that they maybe want to expand. And again, that's being there, being in the conversation, even if it's just being at the picket, like having those conversations at any level, making it clear that like your participation is dependent on these things being represented, and also making it clear to others that like they can be expressing their will through these institutions, through the unions, that the union isn't a superstructure they are under, they are part of its structure.
Yes, thank you. Rose, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to describe like my own evolution in thinking about this because I remember when the Gaza protests first started in April of last year, and I was very much like a climate activist, like Scientist Rebellion, Turtle Island climate. And I remember our initial, or maybe, I'll just describe my own initial reaction was still part of that like competitive mindset of like, oh, we're losing people to this protest movement, which we believe in and are also participant, like, but we're losing capacity. And I now see all of the benefit of those like thousands of students all over the country are now trained in all aspects of nonviolent organizing. It's helping them unionize, it's helping them organize with us. Like we've seen an increase in capacity all across the board because of this protest movement and how powerful it was. And so now I'm sort of like, oh yeah, like like I see the sort of movement ecosystem, like the symbiosis of supporting intersectional movements. And then now I feel like I see more like kefiyas that stand up for science protests. So like it is true that each protest typically has its own like big tagline specific objective, but within there like there's a lot of cross-pollination of people, like everybody's in 3 different groups across some different so I do think that it's starting to exist much more just because yeah, there's a limited number of people and a lot of issues to organize around. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for your answers. There's also another question for you, Rose, and then like I'll ask it to you first, and then if the others still want to maybe add something more. Yeah, is the recent strike or demonstration of scientists in the US already a step in the right direction, the one that's recently happened on March 7th?
I hope so. I mean, for me, like in my kind of like theory of how change works, strikes and demonstrations, unless they're like, you know, filling the streets of your city are typically ways to like build community and onboard people, get people familiar with the concept of non-compliance and disobedience, and sort of get them into the pipeline of meeting regularly with a group and sort of building capacity. So in that sense, like I think it's good that we saw something that was like, hey, fired federal workers, come on into the movement, because I think that sort of sets things in motion for much larger scale forms of non-compliance and striking and marching later. better on. I mean, at this stage, I feel like we're still quite early. I know everything feels incredibly urgent, and it is, but like we're still quite early in the like, you know, rise of fascism timeline where frankly the majority of people in the US are still more or less in support, or at least a plurality are more or less in support of the current administration. Like he hasn't deconstructed enough for it to be obvious to them that he's sort of not representing their true interests. And so I think that we have a little bit more, and also just because everything is happening so quickly, a lot of, you know, newly fired people. I mean, we haven't built that capacity yet. We're not completely organized. That's happening now. It's happening quickly. But you know, we're not quite there yet. So for me, like these strikes are not to achieve a major national political objective. I don't think that's quite possible yet, but they are to build the movement so that we can do that in the future.
Yes, I see. Do any of the other two speakers still maybe want to add something or react to it?
Just I couldn't help be struck by the thought that like if it is a step forward, and I think it is a step forward, it is in the face of I don't know if you get bussed in your countries where like the cops put you on a bus and take you very far away, but it's a step forward after being bussed a long way back in some ways. Like I think we have to acknowledge that like everywhere there's a very bad state and a worsening state going on, and like it's going to take many of these steps of organizing and coming together before we actually feel like we're making progress against these systems. And we got to hold on to hope, I guess.
Nice. Yeah, maybe then let's take the question from Ohm to switch up a bit the different people who are asking. Dee, can you unmute Ohm or? Yes.
Hi,
Yeah, perfect.
can you hear me? Okay, I'm not really presentable, but it's fine. It's enough if you hear my voice. I just wanted to just add to what has been said just now. Two things. One is the unions, and one is that we are early stages of fascism. I think unions in Germany. I mean, Zoe was obviously aware of that, and others are too are extremely slow. And we have been working in other contexts already, trying to push them in out of their depoliticized state, and it is really difficult. And it wouldn't have needed Crisol, it wouldn't have needed Engavis, which is another organization I've been working with for 6 years, to found themselves if the unions had been aware and had been on the scene. And our union landscape anyway in Germany is a joke, because it has been more or less a Beamten state civil servant organization and state official organizations in terms of, as far as education is concerned, and they are not even allowed to go on strike. We don't have student unions, we don't have faculty unions. I mean, Germany is a very special case in terms of unions. So, I mean, this Crisol has been so active, and I have to really emphasize Zoe's fantastic work here, because they are doing this far more than normal members like me. But that's really a work that is stepping in. And I think if the situation is getting worse, which is obviously is, we will need to shape the unions in a very different way than we have earlier, and probably they'll also be a bit more receptive, but it's still way to go, especially in Germany. And the other thing is, we're early days fascism. I think I can't help that being, or thinking that is a very Eurocentric and Western-centric idea. Because when we look at this, I mean, we're very late at understanding that large parts of the world have been facing this earlier. And one example where I've been working for the last 20 years is India, which is still sold to us as the largest democracy in the world, and which is still also sold to us as the country from which we are welcoming migrants, because we, in some racial fantasy, consider they have been born with mathematics geniuses amongst them who can help us with digitization. So there are a lot of ascriptions that come that are actually already fascist in their proliferation. But there's a whole kind of blind spot on how far organized, for example, the Indian right is through all sorts of digital networks, how people are partly, I mean, I don't want to, of course, point fingers, but I know for a fact that there are many here who come as welcomed digital migrants, so to speak, who earn partly part of their incomes by working for the government IT cell, retweeting or recirculating hate speech for money, and so on. So, I mean, we're also importing fascists here and welcoming them and playing them off against Muslims and Arabs and so on. So there's a large context to consider here. And India has been going through 10 years of exactly this form of fascism that we now see in the US. And I always thought, I mean, that's just like, that's the beginning. So why are we not looking there? And that's also something where I think our connections and our networks and our consciousness should be a bit broader and post-Western centric, post-Eurocentric when we're talking about post-colonial studies. I mean, the post-colony is also part of the fascist realm and has been earlier than we have. So that's like two of the caveats I wanted to. I'm sorry, I'm really ill. I'm probably not talking very straight, but yeah, I wanted to be part of that.
Thank you for sharing. Since keeping an eye on the time, maybe we'll take one last question. But before that, I would also maybe like to react to one thing that I saw in the chat about sharing a bit what you're involved with and what you're doing. So we were thinking to share at the end of this event a Padlet. Dee will put the link in the chat, and through this it will be possible to share your local situations and examples of what we've been talking about, so that we can sort of keep an overview, and also, of course, afterwards still connect with each other about these. So feel free to use that Padlet and sort of put whatever you see as resources that can be useful in this theme there. But then we will take one last question. Dee, can you unmute Marion?
Yeah, hi there. Talking from Oslo, Norway. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you. There's a lot of background noise, but we do hear you.
Sorry about that. In terms of unions, I want to just say one thing. So in Norway, we have unions that are pro-fossil. So it's a mixed bag, just as Zoe said earlier. And I was just wondering what people think. I think there are a lot of people, a lot of activists are really exhausted right now, and I'm wondering, in the immediate now, what should we focus on? Because I'm thinking, as Rose said, maybe lots of small demos and actions are not the way to go. I have been wondering, actually, and this was mentioned earlier, whether we should build our own ecosystem where we get our own news out. IT infrastructure, and also building relationship and focusing on regenerative culture. And I just would like to hear what others think in terms of that. Thank you.
Okay, there was a lot of background noise, but maybe if I understood it correctly, what directions can we move forward with, also keeping in mind that many are getting more and more exhausted. Maybe we can do one last round and then close the call. Rose, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. There are so many things to do, and they're all super important. When I make decisions for how to spend my own time, I often try and predict what the maximum possible impact for the least amount of effort is. And right now that feels like training, like doing like setting up like movement infrastructure and training people so that they can train other people, like sort of trying to create like an exponential condition of capacity building. But I don't think that that's necessarily like that's just something that like I like and am good at. So it depletes less energy for me than other types of activities like organizing a demo. But maybe other people love doing that, or people love to write editorial or whatever. Like, so I think it's also a personal question of like what activities deplete your energy the least that could also potentially have the largest effect.
Thank you. Zephyr.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to say to that. One thing that I think was mentioned in there is, and also mentioned about Germany, is like the difficulties of setting up unions and like what can exist. And I want to say an opportunity to say something that hasn't been directly said, which is just to talk about student unions, which are some of the most kind of exciting spaces.
Yeah.
And having been involved with various student unions coming into like existence, often we're told that a student union doesn't exist and then it can't exist, and then eventually that it does exist. Like there's a lot of scope for ways to find some form in which a student union can exist and then can become a really exciting space. So that's a very good place to put your energy into, especially if you're working in a university, and especially if you're working as staff in a university, a teacher or something. For energy, like the fact that we are low energy is part of the system working as intended. It is trying to not have resistance and to kind of grind us out. And like we sort of need to be aware that we are pushing against the Leviathan, and sometimes it may not feel like it's moving. Personally, I get through a lot of it by thinking about whether or not what I'm doing counts as punk art. If it's punk art, I'm like, then it's worth doing for just the sake of it. And also, I think there's a thing in there about like where we get our media from. I cannot recommend enough consuming neither social media nor mass media and just getting what you know from your local organizing communities. You tend to learn most of the things that are going on that are important in the world, but also that are happening around you. And it brings down the scope of what you know and need to worry about a lot to the things that you have good capacity to change.
Thank you. Zoe, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought maybe I'd mix the answer to this with the one question that was in the chat about academic neutrality and working with academics. I feel like the communities that I'm part of are doing a really good job of watching out for each other and like also doing specific events around kind of community care and self-care. And I also feel like exchanges like these that are having an open outcome, like we don't have to produce like a master plan by the end of them, are also really energizing and kind of create space for finding new energy. It's been so nice hearing your perspectives coming from different places. I think that yeah, working with academics is really amazing. I actually come from a kind of an artist union background. Was an artist, but was mostly spending a lot of time working with the Berlin Artists Union. And my perception in the past 1.5 years of kind of all of the cultural institutions and also cultural union-like organizations has been super, super depressing, which I think is related to many different factors. People are extremely precarious, more so than those who do have an institutional position or a long-term contract in academia in the arts. So people are really terrified. Almost everyone's getting their funding on a year-to-year basis, so they're so easy to cut off. And so that makes them so easy to be blackmailed by government interests and censorship. So there's a strong artist community of people who have absolutely no power, and most of them don't speak German because they're all internationals who are doing really, really amazing organizing work, but they don't have the capacity just based on language and kind of focus to do the very useful things that a lot of academics are doing right now. So I think that, yeah, the work that kind of just the self-activated and very autonomous work that is collaborative, but where people kind of have a basic skill set based on university work, where you both are used to working alone, and to working in small groups and to producing a lot of text and to speaking in public, it makes academics really, really well primed for a lot of the things that we're trying to focus on to enact political change. So it's been a really cool experience, and yeah, it's just also so impressive how people can pump out this kind of writing that is necessary for doing political work like so effectively and quickly, whereas artists who work more with visual media struggle with it more. And in terms of academic neutrality, I think that it kind of depends on which field you're in, but I think that the status quo, the common opinion in many fields are, yeah, of course it's a myth, because we know that no one is ever completely neutral. But on the other hand, the term of neutrality is being weaponized in such a crazy way in so many different fields right now that it feels like it merits more attention also. I mean, like, this is also something, false bias in the media is justified by, oh, we need to have neutrality. If there's like 100 million people who think genocide is bad and like 20 people who think it's good, we have to invite one from both groups to the talk show. Or also right now, there was a big scare that went through German civil society organizations and NGOs because after there were protests over the CDU, the Conservative Party, really breaking through a taboo and collaborating on a vote with the fascists, where like from beforehand it was clear they could only pass this vote if the fascists vote yes on it. And this was something that until then all of the German democratic parties had said, we will not do this. We won't pass any legislation if we need the fascists to say yes on it. So they did this, and then there were mass protests. This was right before the election. There were really huge protests that were blaming the conservatives for collaborating with the fascists. And so then the reaction of the Conservative Party was to make this huge parliamentary inquiry into the neutrality and funding of lots of NGOs and civil society groups, and also groups that have never gotten funding, or almost never, like the Grandmas Against Fascism. And this was, of course, a technique that was intended to intimidate, to make every NGO feel like if we say anything bad about what the CDU is doing, then we will have our funding cut off. And this was also really like completely revolved around misusing the term of neutrality, because of course the government is obliged to be neutral, but anyone who's received funding isn't. But that's what they're trying to shift the narrative towards in order to shut people up.
Thank you very much. I feel like we could talk so long about this, and maybe we will organize a next session to continue. But yeah, Dee wanted to do some practical announcements before we close the session.
Yes, and I will go closer to the microphone so you can hear me better. Can you hear me better? I look at you, Laura, so thank you so much. Okay, so just a quick advertising. I'm deeply grateful for the people that participated today, but Laura will do the honors of closing the meeting. I wanted to advertise the next meetings that are going to happen. And as written in the chat, SR Turtle Island is running a speaker series focused on degrowth, and the next talk is going to be March 26th. We have another meeting also coming up on this topic, but more on on attacks on academia, on a global South and majority world perspective, lining up in the planning. We don't have a date yet, but stay tuned on our channels, because we are going to have Argentina for sure, that already confirmed regarding the protest against the Milei administration. And today a lot of suggestions already came up, and we're going to massively use the pad to look for suggestions for other organizations to empower and give a voice to. Finally, something about funding and relying on small donations and not on big donors was mentioned already. So I'm just going to quickly say that SR is trying to run on a small donation-based way to sustain our activities, like the cost for the newsletter sending and for organizing the talks, etc. So there is an option to donate on our website, and yeah, every small donation count. And yeah, thank you so much for making this possible. And I'm going to give the floor back to Laura for the actual closing words.
Yes, thank you so much, Dee. And yeah, first of all, I want to thank the speakers really so much, Zoe, Zephyr, and Rose, for your words. Really, I feel that I needed that without really feeling it so much, but then when hearing them, I really felt that. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for all the questions. Sorry for Lorenzo and maybe all the other questions that were not answered, but yeah, as Dee already said, we will have plenty more opportunity, and hopefully you can also use the Padlet to connect more and to keep these topics alive and share resources and everything. So yeah, thank you all for being here, and I wish you all a very nice rest of the Sunday, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.